Imagine a prince, a duchess, and a secret so explosive, it shattered in front of children, teachers, and stunned parents. It started as a quiet, overcast morning at one of California's most discreet and well-guarded private nurseries. The sort of place where anonymity is purchased with silence and security is paid for in loyalty. The sun had barely broken through the haze when a convoy of sleek, black SUVs pulled up at the drop-off lane just past 8:30 a.m. No royal insignias, no flashing lights, but inside, unmistakable tension simmered beneath the surface. Before we continue, please like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for updates. What no one expected, least of all the teachers, children, or unsuspecting PTA parents sipping lattes in the courtyard, was that by 9:15 a.m., Duchess Meghan Markle would be seen sprinting from the nursery's rear entrance in what witnesses later described as a total emotional collapse. Some say she was barefoot. Others say her makeup was smeared with tears. One parent, whose child had been in the adjoining art room, claimed to hear Meghan scream, "It wasn't supposed to come out like this," before disappearing into the vehicle that raced off without ceremony. But the real rupture didn't begin with her tears. It began with 6 words allegedly uttered by a man few outside royal circles had ever noticed before. The man in question, Meghan's personal bodyguard, known only to most by his first name, Dion. A tall, lean, striking figure who was never far from Meghan's side, but always just far enough to blend into the background. Until that morning, when according to multiple parents and at least one assistant teacher, he leaned in and said softly but deliberately, "I am Archie's real father." The reaction in the room, as described by a stunned member of the Parent Association, was like a sudden power outage. Time seemed to stop. Everyone stared, frozen, unsure if they had heard correctly. Meghan's face reportedly went pale. One teacher dropped a clipboard. Prince Harry, who had been chatting outside with a staff member near the toddler playpen, was summoned with what sources say was an urgent hand gesture by one of the aides. Within moments, the calm veneer shattered. Harry stormed inside, his jaw clenched, face flushed. Witnesses say he looked straight at Meghan without acknowledging anyone else, walked up to her, and in a moment that would be whispered about for days, allegedly grabbed her by the coat collar, not violently, but firmly enough to leave the room in collective silence. The alleged phrase he muttered through clenched teeth? "You promised me he'd never know." Just seconds later, Meghan broke away and dashed out of the room in tears, nearly knocking over a play structure in her path. She wasn't followed. Harry stood motionless. Dion, the bodyguard, remained silent, as if nothing had happened. No security footage has emerged. No nursery staff have gone on record. But what followed was a storm of whispers, leaked screenshots, backroom calls to lawyers, and what appears to be an intentional blackout on social media platforms. One mother claimed that her phone was taken from her by a man in a black suit as she tried to record the scene. Another says she received a call that evening from a private legal firm advising her to avoid public commentary for her own good. But what could possibly have led to this breakdown? How does a seemingly routine visit by 2 royal figures end in accusations, emotional devastation, and a global scandal? To answer that, we must go back, not just to the beginning of that morning, but to the beginning of a complicated, closely guarded relationship dynamic that has long been riddled with speculation, secrecy, and silent alarms. For years, there have been rumors, unverified and swiftly denied, that Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor's paternity might not be as straightforward as the birth certificate suggests. Conspiracy theorists, bloggers, and palace watchers have speculated on everything from IVF to surrogacy to hidden medical files. Meghan and Harry have always presented a united front. In public, they have remained affectionate, composed, and fiercely protective of their children's privacy. But behind the gates of their Montecito mansion, insiders have whispered about late-night arguments, inconsistencies in birth planning, and an almost obsessive tendency to control the narrative. And then there's Dion, the bodyguard who was always there, always watching, always trusted. He was first seen with Meghan in 2018 during a visit to a women's charity. Later, he became a regular fixture at her public appearances, often managing crowd control and press with surgical precision. But some royal observers noticed he was more than just security. He seemed protective in a way that bordered on emotional, more like a companion than an employee. There were reports, dismissed by Meghan's PR team as nonsense, that Dion once accompanied Meghan on a private retreat in Vancouver. that he had been seen comforting her during tense moments on tour, that he even carried Archie in his arms on more than one occasion, despite royal protocol strictly limiting physical contact between security personnel and royal offspring. What truly sent shockwaves through the parent community at the nursery wasn't just the claim. It was the clarity with which it was delivered. The bodyguard wasn't drunk. He wasn't whispering in confusion. He allegedly made the statement calmly, almost intentionally, to a group of people who, until that moment, thought they were witnessing a charming visit by two public figures with their child. Instead, they became accidental witnesses to what now looks like the implosion of a carefully built public image. Meghan's breakdown wasn't theatrical, say those who saw it. It was primal. She reportedly clutched her stomach, gasping between sobs, repeating, "This is all wrong. This isn't how it was supposed to happen." And he said he wouldn't, as she stumbled out the back hallway toward the waiting vehicle. Meanwhile, school staff struggled to contain the chaos. One teacher ushered the remaining children into another room and played soft music to distract them. Another called the principal, who immediately initiated a lockout protocol, standard for high-profile incidents. Parents were instructed to collect their children early and not speak to media. But silence only fueled the fire. Within 24 hours, leaked texts and anonymous emails began circulating. Someone from inside the school, likely a parent, shared a typed, detailed account of the event to a private forum. That account was later screenshot and posted to a now-deleted Twitter thread. In it, the poster wrote, "He looked like he meant it. Like he was finally saying what he'd held in for years." Meghan was shaking. Harry, he didn't even seem shocked. Just angry. Like he'd always suspected but hoped he was wrong. Now the world is left with one central, burning question. Was this a mistake? A moment of madness? Or was it the calculated unraveling of a deeply buried secret? The answers may lie in testimonies from the PDA, in witness statements yet to be made public, in the silence of a bodyguard whose sudden vanishing act only deepens the mystery, and perhaps, most tragically, in the eyes of a child caught between powerful adults, unsure of who to trust. Because as the dust begins to settle, one thing is clear. Something broke inside that nursery, and the fracture is still widening. The morning in question began with little fanfare. Staff at the nursery had been informed 2 days earlier that a pair of high-profile visitors would be stopping by for a brief private check-in, something not uncommon in an institution known for its discretion and elite clientele. But this time, the visitors were not anonymous celebrities or tech billionaires. They were Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, returning with their son, Archie, for what was described as a casual engagement. This wasn't the first time Meghan and Harry had shown up unannounced. Since their relocation to the United States, they had made sporadic, low-key visits to educational centers and family-oriented organizations in the Santa Barbara area. The couple had been particularly vocal about the importance of early childhood development, often citing their own experiences raising Archie and Lilibet as motivation for their advocacy. On the surface, this visit was consistent with their known public interests. According to the nursery's internal schedule, they were to arrive for a brief 20-minute tour and possibly sit in on a music circle with the toddlers. No speeches were planned. No photographers were invited. It was meant to be an intimate affair, almost a favor to a trusted administrator who had ties to the couple's foundation. But looking back, several staff members have quietly questioned whether the visit had an ulterior motive, one far more personal and emotionally volatile than any PR gesture could conceal. Arriving just after 8:30 a.m., Meghan appeared polished but slightly distant. Dressed in a muted camel trench and soft loafers, her outfit suggested calm professionalism, but her eyes reportedly betrayed a nervous undercurrent. Prince Harry followed close behind, carrying Archie in his arms. Witnesses say Harry's face was unreadable, stoic, focused. His movements, however, were noticeably rigid, as if he were anticipating a confrontation or perhaps bracing for something uncertain. It was Dion, Meghan's long-standing bodyguard, who opened the rear car door and gently handed off a child-sized backpack. He then remained unusually close to the family as they entered the building, positioning himself beside Archie with a familiarity that, at least to one observer, seemed a little too natural. Inside the nursery, the mood was warm and welcoming. Staff had taken great care to make the room inviting, with colorful banners spelling out "Welcome Archie" above the toddler reading nook. A soft playlist of children's songs played in the background, and small wooden activity stations had been arranged with fresh crayons, puzzles, and books. Several parents had opted to stay later than usual that morning, hoping to catch a glimpse of the royal visitors or even exchange a word with them. Among them were 3 members of the Parent-Teacher Association, seated discreetly along the side wall of the main room, watching with polite smiles. One of those parents, who later spoke under condition of anonymity, recalled that the energy shifted almost immediately once the trio walked in. There was this kind of strange silence. Not uncomfortable, just heavy. Meghan smiled, said hello to a few staff, and sat down with Archie. But Harry, he kept standing. He looked around, scanning the room, almost like he was looking for someone. Archie, meanwhile, appeared delighted. He ran toward a block station with 2 other children and started building what he excitedly called a castle. Meghan knelt beside him, helping him stack pieces while occasionally brushing his hair back or whispering softly in his ear. Dion remained by the door, hands clasped in front of him, but parents say his eyes rarely left the boy. It was around this time that a preschool aide offered refreshments to the visiting parents: tea, water, and a tray of small pastries. Meghan declined politely. Harry didn't respond. Dion reportedly took a cup of tea but never drank it. A PDA member, positioned near the storybook corner, noted how the atmosphere seemed to grow increasingly tense. Meghan's usual charisma was muted. Her tone was clipped, her gestures practiced. Harry fidgeted. At one point, he adjusted his watch 3 times within 5 minutes. Dion's presence became more conspicuous, stepping closer to Archie than any staff member had seen a bodyguard do before. "I remember thinking to myself, he's acting like he's the one dropping the kid off," one parent said. There was this paternal energy. It wasn't just protectiveness. It was something deeper. At 8:55 a.m., a teacher encouraged the children to gather in a circle for music time. Meghan nudged Archie forward, but instead of walking to the circle on his own, Archie turned and reached for Dion. The bodyguard smiled and held out his arms. Without hesitation, Archie ran into them, wrapping his arms around the man's neck. Dion picked him up and sat down cross-legged with him, placing the boy in his lap. That single moment, tender and subtle, set off what would later become the most explosive 15 minutes in that nursery's history. Multiple parents would later describe the look on Meghan's face as shock mixed with fear. She stood, half-frozen, glancing from Archie to Dion and then to Harry, who had not yet noticed the interaction. When Harry did look over and saw his son cradled in another man's arms, witnesses claim his jaw tightened, his mouth fell slightly open. He didn't move. Dion, seemingly unfazed, whispered something to Archie. Then, calmly, he looked around the room and reportedly said, just loud enough for those nearby to hear, "He always liked music time." The line didn't register at first, but for at least one parent, that was the clue, an indication that this wasn't a simple comment. This was familiarity, personal memory, a statement from someone who had been there far longer and far more intimately than anyone had assumed. By 9:03 a.m., the room had begun to shift. Meghan stood up abruptly. Harry took 2 steps toward her. One teacher paused her guitar strumming mid-song. Archie looked up at Dion, then turned toward Meghan and said, "Mommy, look, my other daddy's here too." It was that moment, according to several sources, that Meghan's entire posture collapsed. She reached for her bag. Her face contorted, not in confusion, but panic. She turned to Harry, whispering something rapidly. Dion stood up, placing Archie gently on the floor. Then, he spoke again. This time, clearly and audibly. "I am Archie's real father." Silence. A kind of silence that doesn't feel like quiet, but instead like impact. The seconds that followed were thick with disbelief. Meghan staggered backward, covering her mouth. Harry's face went pale. Parents sat frozen. One child began to cry. Harry stepped forward. His voice, when it finally emerged, was hoarse and trembling. He didn't yell. He didn't scream. He simply looked at Meghan and said something no one expected. "You lied to me." And then, like a sudden storm, the energy snapped. Meghan turned, shaking, grabbing at her coat. She looked at Dion, then at Harry, and for a heartbeat, she seemed unable to move. Finally, she ran, through the side hallway that led to the rear parking lot, knocking over a chair as she passed. The back door slammed behind her. Harry remained still, rooted to the floor. Dion, now the focus of every gaze, said nothing further. He walked to the doorway, nodded at one of the staff members, and exited slowly, as if his part in the story had ended with those 6 words. In the aftermath, staff scrambled to regain order. Children were consoled. Parents exchanged glances, unsure whether to stay or leave. One administrator ushered the remaining guests into his side room to explain the incident as a personal matter requiring immediate attention. But no explanation could dull what had just unfolded. Not for those who saw it, not for those who heard it, and certainly not for a little boy named Archie, whose world may have shifted forever that morning in the middle of music time. The world knew him only in fragments, grainy background images and paparazzi shots, a tall shadow near Meghan Markle during royal outings, a silent figure opening car doors or keeping a firm but discreet distance between the Duchess and the crowd. But after that nursery incident, the man known only as Dion became the center of a media firestorm that threatened to tear apart one of the most carefully constructed royal narratives of the modern era. Until that fateful morning, Dion was just another faceless member of the Sussex security team. A name rarely mentioned, a role never truly examined. He was never granted a public profile, and unlike most celebrity bodyguards, he didn't seem interested in cultivating one. There were no interviews, no tell-all memoirs, no leaks. He was, by all accounts, loyal to a fault, which is why his sudden, unfiltered declaration, "I am Archie's real father," sent shockwaves through every media outlet, royal insider circle, and security agency from Los Angeles to London. So who is Dion? And why did he say it? To understand the gravity of his words, we must go back years, long before Archie was born, before Harry and Meghan fled royal life, and even before Meghan's marriage. That is where the trail begins. Dion Wexler, full name verified through Security Contractor Registry, was born in Maryland, USA. A former U.S. Marine with a pristine service record, he served 2 tours in the Middle East, was decorated for exemplary field leadership, and discharged honorably in 2011. After leaving military service, Dion transitioned into private security and soon built a strong reputation as a high-level operative specializing in executive protection for women in high-risk environments. He worked briefly with political families and A-list celebrities before quietly taking on a contract with Kensington Palace in late 2017. His placement on Meghan's detail began shortly after her engagement to Prince Harry. Official palace documents, reviewed but not publicly released, show that Dion was vetted not just for his military background, but also for his psychological and discretion profiles. Unlike many in the security field who often leaked or bragged, Dion was silent. Controlled. Almost too perfect. Meghan reportedly hand-selected Dion from a short list of vetted candidates. A source close to the palace security office at the time claimed that Meghan felt a sense of familiarity and immediate trust with Dion, even requesting that he accompany her on more private or personal errands. While that might have raised eyebrows, it wasn't considered unusual. Royals often form unique bonds with their security teams, especially during stressful transitions. What began as a professional rapport quickly evolved into something more complex. During the 2018 royal tour of Oceania, Dion was present in nearly every single engagement. While most security personnel rotated shifts, Dion did not. He was photographed adjusting Meghan's umbrella during a downpour in Fiji, standing at her side during a particularly emotional visit to a market in Tonga, and even holding her handbag momentarily during a behind-the-scenes arrival in Sydney. Observers at the time noted his proximity, but wrote it off as a security necessity. But behind palace walls, tensions were growing. Some aides questioned why Meghan was requesting Dion's presence in rooms where security was not traditionally required. One senior staffer claimed Dion was even present in the delivery planning sessions when Meghan was preparing to give birth to Archie, a level of access virtually unheard of for a private contractor. In fact, it was around the time of Meghan's pregnancy that questions truly began to circulate. Multiple staff members noticed Dion arriving at Frogmore Cottage at odd hours, even when Harry was reportedly away on engagements. Some claimed to have overheard hushed arguments between Meghan and a female assistant regarding Dion's presence. Others simply said nothing, too afraid of retaliation in an environment that was rapidly becoming known for non-disclosure agreements and tight-lipped loyalty. Then came Archie's birth. A moment that should have brought joy was shrouded in confusion. Meghan and Harry famously broke tradition by refusing the customary post-birth photo outside the hospital. They announced Archie's birth hours after it happened, releasing only staged photographs days later. Rumors swirled that the actual location of the birth wasn't Portland Hospital, as claimed, but instead a private, undisclosed clinic. Even more bizarre, Dion was spotted entering and exiting a side door of that same clinic just hours before the birth was announced. He wasn't on duty that day. Following Archie's birth, Dion's presence became more subdued but no less significant. He was seen less in public, but reportedly retained a keycard to the couple's residence. Multiple insiders alleged that he would still accompany Meghan on solo outings, sometimes dressed in civilian clothing to avoid attracting attention. A former security consultant who briefly worked with the Sussex household claimed that Dion was treated like family and that his voice often carried surprising weight in decision-making meetings. Was this level of access simply the result of extreme trust? Or was there more behind the loyalty? Some believe Meghan and Dion shared a bond rooted in trauma. Both had dealt with invasive media attention, systemic scrutiny, and pressure to conform. Meghan, a biracial woman navigating the British aristocracy, and Dion, a Black American man trained in systems of silence, perhaps found refuge in one another. But others see something far more intimate, a relationship that may have blurred the lines between protection and partnership. One anonymous house staff member who worked briefly at the MONTECITO residence claimed Dion would often arrive after hours. He wasn't just security, they said. He was something else, something closer. Another said she witnessed Dion placing a hand on Meghan's shoulder in a way that felt far too familiar for a professional relationship. All of this came to a head during the nursery visit. According to multiple parents who witnessed the incident, Dion's declaration wasn't shouted or blurted out in anger. It was said quietly, almost reverently, as if it had been rehearsed in his mind for years. "I'm Archie's real father." 6 words that changed everything. 6 words that broke open a silence that had clearly become too heavy to bear. Why now? Why in public? Some speculate that Dion, perhaps tired of hiding, chose that moment deliberately. Others believe it was a moment of emotional weakness, triggered by the sight of the child, the atmosphere, the song being played during music circle. But a leaked email from a former security colleague suggests something darker. That Dion had recently been dismissed or was on the verge of termination, and that his declaration was an act of rebellion or revenge. No official statement has been made from Meghan, Harry, or their legal representatives regarding Dion's claim. Dion himself has vanished from public view. According to reports, he is no longer employed by the Sussex household. His last known residence was an apartment in Ventura County, but neighbors say he hasn't been seen in weeks. There are, however, whispers of a sealed legal document. One former legal assistant, working with a firm known to represent Meghan and Harry, hinted that Dion may have signed a non-disclosure agreement so restrictive that any further public comment could lead to criminal charges. If such a document exists, it may explain the deafening silence that followed his explosive revelation. Yet the damage is already done. Archie's paternity, a topic once dismissed as the invention of tabloids, has now taken center stage in a scandal threatening the very image Meghan and Harry have worked so hard to cultivate. And at the heart of it stands a man once trusted with their lives, now claiming a far more intimate connection. Was Dion telling the truth? Or was this the desperate cry of a man pushed out of the inner circle? Only time will tell. But the question has been asked, and it will not go away. No one expected the day to unravel like this. By all outward appearances, the visit had gone smoothly up until that exact moment, smooth enough that most of the parents in the room began to relax. Some sipped lukewarm coffee from biodegradable cups, others gently rocked their toddlers while chatting quietly with nearby staff. On the outside, the entire event maintained the illusion of normalcy. But beneath the polished veneer, a powder keg had been building pressure for months, perhaps even years, and it was about to explode. The room fell still, not with a bang, but with a whisper. Just 6 words. Quiet, controlled, and deliberate. "I'm Archie's real father." The words fell from Dion's lips not as a confession, but as a statement of fact. No tremble in his voice. No apology. No hesitation. He stood near the edge of the music circle, arms gently folded, watching as Archie clapped along to the final chords of The Itsy Bitsy Spider. But when the song ended, and the room's attention turned to gather the children for snack time, that's when he spoke. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't call out. He simply set it to the air, and those who were near enough to hear felt the air drain out of the room. At first, it didn't register with everyone. Several parents continued gathering crayons and jackets, oblivious to the lightning bolt that had just struck. But those closest to him, 2 PDA members and 1 assistant teacher, froze mid-motion. One parent holding a juice box paused, blinked, and asked quietly, "What did you just say?" Dion repeated it, this time looking straight at her. "I am Archie's real father." Within seconds, the atmosphere curdled. It wasn't just the shock of the statement, it was the timing, the confidence, the setting. A nursery full of children, teachers, parents, Meghan and Harry. The reaction was delayed, almost like everyone was waiting for someone else to call it out first. Meghan, who had been crouched beside Archie seconds earlier, stood bolt upright, her face drained of color. Her mouth opened, then closed. Her hands went to her forehead. She didn't speak. She didn't scream. Not yet. But her body swayed as if she had been physically hit. Across the room, Prince Harry, engaged in casual conversation with a young staffer, turned toward the sudden silence. He squinted at Dion, perhaps not immediately catching what had been said. But when he saw Meghan's reaction, he stiffened. According to one eyewitness, it was as if Harry's entire body tensed in a single breath. He turned white. Not pale, white. Like the color was sucked out of him. And then he started walking, fast, toward Meghan. Meghan's lips began to move, whispering something, over and over. "No, no, not here. Not like this." She turned to Dion. "What are you doing?" she mouthed. But Dion didn't move. He didn't flinch. His eyes remained locked on Meghan for a moment, and then turned back toward Archie, who was now tugging on a teacher's arm, asking for more bubbles. The room began to fracture. One mother stood and gathered her child with shaky hands, whispering to another parent, "Did he just say what I think he said?" The teacher leading the activity looked lost, her eyes darting from Meghan to Harry, then to Dion. A father near the reading corner started reaching for his phone. Someone whispered, "Get the kids out." Someone else called for the principal. Harry stopped just a few feet from Meghan. He didn't speak immediately. He looked at her, at the bodyguard, at Archie. Witnesses later said he looked like a man watching a dam break, unable to stop the flood. Finally, his voice emerged. "You promised me he'd never know." The room collapsed into stillness again. Meghan shook her head, murmuring, "This wasn't supposed to happen." And then, it was as if something in her broke. She spun on her heel and ran, not walked, not rushed, ran out of the room, knocking over a small table filled with picture books. Her shoes clattered behind her. Her trench coat flapped violently as she vanished down the hall. Children started crying. Some clung to their parents. One small girl began wailing. Staff moved quickly to shield the kids, to pull them into a quiet area. But the damage had already been done. Harry didn't follow Meghan. He didn't yell. He didn't defend her. He just stood there, shoulders squared, fists clenched. Dion, remarkably, still hadn't moved. He didn't speak again. He didn't chase after Meghan. He didn't apologize. In fact, according to one mother, he looked calmer than ever. The silence didn't last long. Within minutes, the principal arrived. She had been called from her office across the building and arrived just in time to see Meghan's car speeding off down the back exit road. Harry and Dion stood on opposite sides of the play area. The principal quietly asked the staff to move the children into another room. She then called an internal lockdown, standard protocol when a security breach or traumatic event occurs. What followed was chaos, but controlled chaos. Parents were ushered into a meeting room, where they were told that there had been a personal incident involving the visiting guests and that the school would issue a written update later that day. Phones were quietly requested to be put away. Staff began writing incident reports. Legal advisors connected to the Sussex household began calling within the hour. One staff member, speaking anonymously, said she was immediately asked to sign a non-disclosure agreement about what she saw. Another parent claimed she was offered an incentive not to speak to the media. Another said her husband's law firm was contacted preemptively to remind them of their duty to protect private information. Despite the clampdown, the story could not be contained. By that evening, an anonymous Reddit thread popped up detailing the event, claiming to be from a parent who had been in the room. Screenshots followed. Then came a blurry audio clip, just a few seconds long, where a man's voice could be heard saying, "I am Archie's real father." That clip, uploaded to a YouTube short before being removed, sparked millions of views within hours. Comment sections exploded. Newsrooms lit up. And the question that no one dared say aloud for years was now on every screen in the world. What if Archie isn't Harry's biological child? The implications are massive. Not just for Meghan and Harry as individuals, but for the legitimacy of their entire narrative, their brand, their image, their foundation. If true, the revelation could unravel legal custody agreements, disrupt royal titles, even alter the public's perception of the very nature of the couple's relationship. More chillingly, it suggests that an entire ecosystem of people may have known the truth and protected it. Why did Dion choose that moment? Why in front of so many people? Did he intend to blow up their carefully curated image? Or was this his only way of forcing the truth into the light? Some believe the statement was strategic, a calculated move timed during an event where press were barred, but dozens of high-status witnesses were present. The setting, a nursery filled with children and parents, was both intimate and public, perfect for a confession that could not be ignored or buried. Others think it was emotional. Perhaps seeing Archie engage so naturally, even affectionately, triggered something in Dion, the truth rising out of the pit of his chest before he had the chance to pull it back. One former royal press aide speculated that Dion had been silenced for years, that he might have signed binding agreements, that he had lived in the shadows, watching from the sidelines as another man raised the boy he believed was his own. Whatever the motive, the outcome is irreversible. Those 6 words now live in whispers, in screenshots, in search bars, in whispered conversations around playgrounds and dinner tables. I'm Archie's real father. The day the truth escaped. The moment a family's secrets collided with the real world. And for Meghan and Harry, a fracture that may never be mended. It was not a planned exit. There was no security protocol in place for what unfolded. No royal aide standing at the ready with an emergency umbrella. No camera-ready smile. Just panic. Raw, unrehearsed, and deeply human. The moment Dion's quiet, deliberate statement landed, "I am Archie's real father," a fuse ignited inside Meghan Markle that quickly became a wildfire. At first, it looked like denial. Her lips moved rapidly, soundless. Her eyes darted from Dion to Harry and back again, searching for an anchor, a way out, an explanation. But none came. Her fingers reached up to her temples as though trying to push the words out of her head. And then, as if every cell in her body rejected the reality forming in front of her, she cracked. Completely. Witnesses described it as instantaneous. She just imploded, one mother said later. It was like watching someone's internal skeleton collapse in front of you. Her whole face contorted. Her breathing changed. She made this low, almost growling sound like she was choking on something she couldn't say. Another recalled Meghan clutching her stomach, not out of physical pain, but as though holding her core together. She was repeating the same phrase under her breath, something about the truth leaking too soon, or, it wasn't supposed to come out like this. It wasn't loud, but it was haunting. By then, the nursery had descended into a surreal atmosphere. Children were being escorted out by staff members trying to preserve some sense of normalcy. A few younger toddlers had started to cry, sensing the chaos. The principal had arrived but was clearly caught off guard, her voice low and shaky as she attempted to coordinate staff into emergency roles. But Meghan's world had already spun completely off its axis. As if propelled by some internal scream that wouldn't come out of her mouth, she suddenly turned and bolted, her heels skimming the floor, hair wild, eyes unseeing. She sprinted out of the toddler circle, nearly tripping over a wooden pushcart one of the children had left behind. She didn't stop to check on Archie. She didn't look at Dion. She didn't glance back at Harry. It was pure flight. Adrenaline and instinct. One of the staff tried to ask if she was okay, stepping slightly into her path with an outstretched hand. Meghan shoved past her without a word, nearly knocking the woman sideways. Her coat sleeve got caught on a child's art easel near the hallway, yanking the whole structure down behind her. Paint bottles and brushes exploded onto the polished floor, creating a surreal smear of color in her wake. Then the scream came. Outside the rear doors, a child's voice had asked a teacher what was happening. In response, came the unmistakable sound of Meghan's voice, now high-pitched and cracking, echoing off the brick courtyard walls. Why now? Why here? This isn't how it was supposed to come out. According to a witness who had just entered the main hall to sign in her daughter, Meghan was crouched by the base of a large planter outside the rear fire door, sobbing so violently her shoulders convulsed. Her phone was in one hand. Her other hand clutched a crumpled tissue that was already soaked through. 2 security officers approached, but she waved them off. Her eyes were wide, frenzied, darting across the courtyard like a trapped animal. And then came the words that would stick with those who heard them for weeks. He promised. He promised he wouldn't say anything. This line, shouted with such force that even staff indoors heard it, wasn't addressed to anyone in particular. But its meaning hit like a thunderclap. Meghan wasn't just shocked. She felt betrayed. Not just blindsided by Dion's admission, but crushed by what appeared to be a broken pact. A pact that, in her mind, had been sacred. Whatever had been agreed upon behind closed doors had clearly fallen apart in public. Prince Harry had followed her as far as the hallway, stopping just short of the door. He didn't go to her. He didn't call out. He stood silently, his expression unreadable. One teacher peeking from a side corridor said Harry's fists were clenched so tight they trembled. His eyes weren't angry. They were empty. Meghan remained crouched, her breathing erratic. At one point, she removed her coat entirely, tossing it on the ground and collapsing onto the concrete steps behind the building. It took nearly 3 full minutes for her security team to convince her to stand. When she finally did, she used the side mirror of the SUV to wipe her mascara-streaked cheeks with the sleeve of her blouse. Then she made a call. Nobody knows who she called, whether it was a lawyer, her mother, a publicist, or someone from the palace. But the tone of the call was unmistakable. Those who heard fragments of it through the open window say it was a mixture of fury and terror. She was pacing in circles, just shouting into the phone, said one parent who watched from the school's east window. Her voice was cracking. At one point, she said something like, "We had this locked down. He had everything he needed. Why now?" By the time the SUV rolled out of the school's back lot, Meghan was in the back seat, face buried in her hands, hair undone. The vehicle didn't use the main exit. Instead, it turned down a maintenance path and exited through a rarely used service road, avoiding reporters and onlookers gathered out front. Inside the nursery, the fallout was immediate. The director ordered all visitors to vacate the premises. Staff began collecting statements from witnesses. The children were moved to a quiet room and given extra snacks and storybooks. Teachers tried to maintain a sense of calm, though many were visibly shaken. One educator said she had never seen such an emotional collapse in her 20 years of early childhood care. "It wasn't the tears that scared me," she later confided. "It was the desperation." She was unraveling in real time. Like her world had been built on something fragile, and someone had just cracked it open with a chisel. Several parents demanded an emergency meeting. Some threatened to pull their children out unless assurances were made about security. One parent, a former child psychologist, raised concerns about the emotional impact on the kids who witnessed Meghan's breakdown. Another mother reportedly fainted in the parking lot after the incident, requiring assistance from staff. Later that day, several parents received an official letter from the school, carefully worded and vaguely phrased, referring to the incident as an emotionally charged moment involving guests, and assuring families that staff had responded professionally to keep children safe. The letter made no mention of the claim, the bodyguard, or Meghan's public outburst. But by then, the damage was done. The rumors were already out. Screenshots of texts from panicked parents were circulating. A few lines from Meghan's scream were paraphrased and posted to private Facebook groups. Audio recordings, however brief or muffled, began to surface. The story was leaking. The seal had broken. The truth, or at least something dangerously close to it, had spilled into public consciousness. For Meghan, the emotional toll was undeniable. A woman long accused of controlling narratives, curating images, and scripting her every public move had finally lost control. And it happened in front of children, parents, teachers, and her husband. The humiliation was not just in the claim Dion had made, but in the vulnerability Meghan showed afterward, something the public had rarely witnessed. And yet, that vulnerability did not inspire universal sympathy. In the online world, the reaction was immediate and vicious. Critics called it karma. Headlines framed it as a meltdown, a royal disaster in broad daylight. Supporters called for compassion, reminding the public that no woman, no mother, deserves such a public unraveling. But even among the sympathetic, the lingering question remained. What truth was she so desperate to hide? Why did a single sentence, from a man who was supposed to protect her, unravel her so completely? And most haunting of all, what did Archie see? When Prince Harry stepped into that nursery room, summoned not by a call, but by the unspoken urgency etched across every stunned face, he did not look like a man unsure of what had happened. He looked like someone who already knew. Someone who had feared this exact moment for longer than he dared admit, and who had been bracing for its arrival ever since. The murmurs had frozen. The parents had gone still. Even the children, so often buffered from adult emotions, could feel the shift in the air. Dion's words, those 6 quiet, devastating words, had cracked the ground open. But it was Harry's reaction that set the earth quaking. According to 2 eyewitnesses and 1 staff member, Harry's eyes locked immediately on Dion, then shifted to Meghan, who stood several feet away near the reading corner, pale, visibly trembling. Meghan's lips were moving rapidly, but no words were audible. She looked like she had stopped breathing. Her eyes darted between Harry and Dion, then down at Archie, who sat obliviously beside a teacher, humming softly. Harry moved with force, not a sprint, but a determined, purposeful march. His face was unreadable. Not rage, not sorrow, something colder, something harder. Witnesses would later describe it as the expression of a man who felt not surprised, but betrayed in the most intimate way. He walked right past Dion, past the children, straight to Meghan. And then, in a moment that would become the centerpiece of every hushed conversation that followed, Harry reportedly reached out, grabbed Meghan by the front of her coat, just below the collar, and whispered something only she could hear. Some witnesses saw his knuckles whiten with the pressure. Others insist it was not violent, but assertive, possessive. What no one disputes is that Meghan's entire body went slack in that instant. Her knees wobbled. She gasped. She raised her hands, almost as if in surrender. Whatever he said, it landed like a blow. One mother, standing just 10 feet away, said she heard the words clearly. "You promised me he'd never know." Not shouted, not barked. Spoken with a kind of quiet fury that spoke of years of emotional erosion, sleepless nights, and whispered fears. Words from a man who felt he had been made into a fool, not by his enemies, but by the person he trusted most. That moment was as shocking as it was brief. Meghan stumbled backward, wrenching herself free from his grip. She didn't say a word, didn't push him, didn't cry. Instead, she froze, her mouth open, eyes wide. Then, with a suddenness that jolted everyone, she turned and fled. She pushed past a child's easel, narrowly missing a tray of finger paints, her shoes squeaking on the polished nursery floor as she ran for the side hallway. Her exit was not graceful, it was desperate. She nearly tripped on the edge of a rug before slamming through the emergency access door that led to the school's rear courtyard. The silence that followed her departure was almost unbearable. Harry didn't follow. He remained where he stood, shoulders heaving from shallow breaths. He looked around the room, not at anyone in particular, but as if seeing it for the first time. His eyes paused briefly on Dion, who had not moved. Then on Archie, who was now playing with toy blocks beside another child, completely unaware of the emotional catastrophe that had just detonated around him. A staff member tried to speak to Harry, to offer him a seat, to give him space, but he waved her off gently, almost dazed. Dion, meanwhile, stepped back, retreating toward the entrance of the classroom. His face was unreadable. He said nothing more. But there was no panic in his demeanor, only a strange stillness, as though he had been preparing for this moment for a long time and had already made peace with it. It was then, according to one teacher, that something remarkable happened. Archie stood up, walked over to Dion, and reached for his hand. The gesture was instinctive, intimate, natural. Dion looked down at the boy, then glanced at Harry. For a split second, the three of them stood in silent tableau, father, child, and man who may no longer be certain of his role. The scene was surreal, heartbreaking, and deeply unsettling for all who witnessed it. Harry didn't stop his son. He didn't call him back. Instead, he turned around, walked to the far end of the room, and sat in one of the small wooden chairs meant for children. He buried his face in his hands and remained that way for several long minutes. Meanwhile, Dion knelt beside Archie, spoke softly to him. No one could hear the words, and gently handed him a plastic toy before standing again. He gave a respectful nod to a nearby staff member and walked out the main door without looking back. The reaction among the remaining adults was split. Some were frozen in disbelief. Others began whispering furiously behind cupped hands. One father muttered to another, "Did that just happen?" A few parents immediately gathered their children and left. Inside the administrative office, chaos had already begun. The school principal, now fully aware of the explosion that had taken place in her nursery, was coordinating crisis communications with legal representatives. Phone calls were made to the Sussex family's private team. Instructions were relayed to staff. Keep calm, protect the children, document everything, and avoid media engagement. One senior staff member later told a close friend, "It was the most surreal day of my life. I've seen kids break bones, we've had evacuations, even police incidents. But nothing like this." You could feel the emotional weight of it crushing the room. As for Harry, he eventually stood up, smoothed his blazer, and walked over to Archie. He didn't lift him, didn't hug him. He simply knelt down and asked him if he wanted to go home. Archie smiled and nodded. Harry took his hand, thanked the teacher softly, and walked him toward the exit. He didn't say goodbye to anyone else. Security met them at the front entrance. Meghan was nowhere to be seen. A second vehicle had already arrived to separate their departure, presumably coordinated after Meghan's own distress call in the courtyard. What came next was a communications firestorm. Within hours, lawyers were engaged. Staff were told not to speak to anyone outside the institution. Phones were seized by administrative staff temporarily for review. All digital cameras, including the nursery's internal security systems, were checked to ensure no footage had been leaked. But damage control could only go so far. A staff member inside the facility quietly texted a relative. That message, paraphrased and anonymized, appeared in a parenting forum later that night. It described a scene eerily similar to what multiple witnesses would soon confirm: Prince Harry confronting Meghan physically, grabbing her by the collar, and delivering a single, devastating line. "You promised me he'd never know." The news moved fast. Bloggers picked it up. Screenshots were shared. Private messages began to surface. And as the world began to learn what had transpired in that small nursery in Montecito, one image remained at the heart of the storm: a prince, a duchess, and a bodyguard, locked in a triangle of unspoken truths, each of them shattered in their own way. Some would say Harry was the victim of a grand deception. Others would argue he was complicit in a silent agreement that finally broke under the weight of reality. But no matter which side one believes, the nursery incident revealed something undeniable. Behind the glamour and carefully curated PR, this was a family on the brink. And in that moment, when a husband reached for his wife not with affection but with accusation, the royal fairy tale disintegrated in full view of people who had only come to watch their children play. Amid the swirling chaos, stunned adults, muffled gasps, and unspoken accusations, there was one figure who stood at the center of it all, unaware yet not untouched. Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor, just a few years old, watched the world he knew shift in real time. And though the adults around him moved swiftly to shield him from the emotional wreckage, there are some things a child cannot unsee. Those who were present that day at the nursery describe Archie as initially joyful, even excited. His arrival with both parents had been the highlight of his morning. He was reportedly laughing when he entered the classroom, bouncing from one corner to the next, exchanging greetings with the teachers, and even initiating a game of castle blocks with another child before music time. By all accounts, Archie was a well-liked child. Respectful, cheerful, and quick to smile, he had built an easy rapport with both teachers and peers. One staff member noted that he often displayed a level of emotional maturity unusual for his age, and added that he seemed very in tune with the adults around him, especially his mother. But on that morning, something changed. As Meghan grew more distant, her smiles forced, her eyes elsewhere, Archie noticed. Several teachers later confirmed that he approached her more than once, tugging her sleeve, asking questions she didn't seem fully present to answer. At one point, he reportedly asked, "Mommy, are you sad?" She knelt down, hugged him briefly, and whispered something inaudible. He appeared content for the moment, but the dissonance around him was already seeping in. Then came music circle. The teacher leading the session had asked the children to gather on a large carpet patterned with numbers and colors. Archie joined, and according to the aide assisting that day, he looked directly at Dion and smiled. "Dion, come sit." Dion had hesitated for a second, then stepped forward and took a spot on the edge of the circle. Archie ran over to him, unbothered by protocol or boundaries, and clambered into his lap. The entire room paused. For the adults in attendance, the scene was jarring. Dion had not been expected to engage. He was security, background, invisible by design. But to Archie, Dion was more than a figure in the shadows. He was familiar, safe, perhaps even comforting. He leaned back into Dion like he had done it 100 times, one PDA mother later said. He rested his head on his chest. "I don't know, it was like watching a child return to his base. His anchor." No one stopped him. Even Meghan, frozen across the room, didn't call him back. Harry looked over, his gaze flickering from Dion to Archie and back again, but said nothing. Then came the moment. The words, "I'm Archie's real father." There was no way Archie could have understood the full gravity of that sentence. But he understood the reaction. He saw his mother freeze. He saw her eyes fill with tears. He watched his father's face harden. He saw his teacher's mouth drop open. And he felt the change in the room's temperature. palpable, stinging, unnatural. He stood, stepped forward slightly, and tugged at Dion's shirt. "What's wrong?" he asked. The silence stretched like elastic around him. A teacher approached and offered him a small puzzle. He took it, but glanced back toward his parents. It was then that Meghan started to unravel. From his vantage point, Archie saw her clutch her stomach, begin to shake, and stumble back. He watched as she turned and ran. Her coat caught on a chair. Her voice cracked. She shoved through the side door. He saw her vanish. One teacher dropped to her knees beside him, trying to gently redirect his attention. "Let's go color something," she offered. "Want to make a rainbow?" But Archie didn't move. His eyes were on the door. He blinked. His mouth opened slightly. He didn't cry. He didn't ask for her. But the change in his demeanor was undeniable. The sparkle vanished. His shoulders slumped. He sat down slowly, placing the puzzle on the floor but not engaging with it. Children are intuitive, far more than adults often realize. While they may not grasp the complexities of adult betrayal, they recognize pain, fear, and confusion. And on that morning, Archie felt all three. Then came the moment with Harry. The prince approached, knelt, and asked if Archie was ready to go. Archie didn't rush into his arms. He didn't beam or shout with joy. He nodded quietly, stood, and walked beside him toward the door. But before they reached it, he stopped. "Where's Dion?" he asked. Harry didn't answer. Instead, he squeezed the boy's hand slightly and kept walking. According to a staffer positioned near the entrance, Archie turned his head one more time before leaving, eyes scanning the room, perhaps searching for someone, perhaps for answers. That evening, the teachers held a closed-door debrief to discuss how best to support Archie in the coming days. A child psychologist on retainer for the school offered insight. "Children remember how moments make them feel more than what is said," she explained. "He may not remember the phrase, but he'll remember the tone, the tension, the faces." She recommended gentle follow-up sessions, normalcy and routine, and most of all, reassurance. But the issue wasn't only emotional. It was legal. Within 48 hours, a private specialist in childhood trauma visited the school. Her goal, to assess the fallout. Confidential interviews were conducted with every teacher who had interacted with Archie during and after the incident. One troubling report emerged. A teacher had asked Archie during story time if he wanted to talk about anything that had happened, not directly referencing the incident, but opening a space for emotional processing. Archie had reportedly looked up and said, "Dion is my secret daddy." The phrase was repeated, documented, flagged. Administrators now faced a moral and professional dilemma. Were they to alert child welfare officials? Would this spiral into a public investigation? Would the institution be dragged into legal chaos over a royal family scandal? In the end, they chose discretion. The report was sealed. A non-disclosure form was updated for all employees. An internal directive was given. No discussion of Archie's statement. No repetition. No speculation. But the damage had already seeded itself in the minds of those who heard it. What had Dion told the child behind closed doors? Had there been years of veiled truths, whispered at bedtime or revealed in moments of innocent curiosity? And most pressingly, how would this affect Archie as he grew? Children who experience public conflict between caregivers, especially over identity or paternity, often struggle with issues of self-worth, confusion over familial roles, and deep anxiety. Experts warn that the effects may not surface immediately, but they will surface. If Archie does grow up to question the foundation of his family, this moment may be the first memory to come flooding back. The memory of a room falling silent. The memory of his mother running away. The memory of his father gripping his mother's coat. The memory of Dion, calm and steady, whispering, "It's okay, buddy." And that quiet certainty that no one could quite erase. The sense that something sacred, something private, had been broken out in the open, while he sat on the rug, surrounded by paint and puppets and puzzles. For now, Archie is still a child, still smiling on the outside, still shielded by those who insist that he be protected from the headlines. But the truth has a way of living in shadows until it's ready to step into the light. And no matter how much the adults scramble to hide the cracks, Archie saw. And he will remember. By the end of that day, the nursery's charming, sunlit walls had absorbed far more than the usual echoes of giggles and alphabet songs. The incident involving Meghan, Harry, Dion, and the emotionally charged declaration had already begun to carve itself into whispered lore among the elite parents of Montecito. but the group whose perspective would shape the foundation of public knowledge. Before the palace's legal machinery moved into high gear was the PDA. The Parent-Teacher Association of the nursery was not a small gathering of casual moms and part-time dads. This was an influential, organized, and often intimidating body of well-connected professionals, philanthropists, executives, and yes, celebrity spouses. Their function wasn't just to plan bake sales and field trips. They were the eyes and ears of the institution. The kind of parents who had lawyers on speed dial and friends in media. And many of them were there. 3 PDA officers, in particular, had front-row seats. All 3 later submitted confidential statements to the school's legal team, but parts of those statements, almost inevitably, leaked. They formed the bedrock of what the public came to know about that surreal morning. The first PDA member, a prominent attorney and mother of 2, had been seated along the north wall of the activity room when Dion's words shattered the silence. Her child was engaged in coloring, but her focus had already shifted to the subtle tension between Meghan and Dion long before the outburst. She described the moment as chilling. "I watched his body language before he spoke," she later wrote. "It wasn't erratic. It was resolved. It was as though he had been rehearsing this in his mind for months. When he said those words, 'I am Archie's real father,' he didn't look at Meghan. He looked at the boy." According to this account, the reaction of those around was just as telling. Meghan was visibly shocked, frozen. You could see the panic ripple through her spine. But what caught me was Harry. He didn't look surprised. He looked hurt, like he'd known, deep down, but never wanted confirmation. The second PDA member, a tech executive father known for being a skeptic of gossip, offered a more clinical view. He, too, was in the room and recalled the precise atmosphere change. There was a beat, a breath. As though everyone in the room processed the statement in real time, but no one knew what to do with it. The teachers didn't move. The children, surprisingly, were the last to react. But what happened next, Harry grabbing Meghan, the confrontation, it wasn't theatrical. It was real, messy, unscripted. He added a haunting observation. "I've seen powerful men collapse under financial losses, divorces, betrayal. But I've never seen a man look so emptied." Harry just stood there, like someone had reached into his chest and removed the center of his being. The third PDA member was the one who initiated a private group message with other parents shortly after the incident. In that thread, screenshotted and later leaked to a parenting blog, she wrote, "There was no protocol for what we witnessed today. It felt like we were all suddenly unwilling guests at the collapse of a royal fairy tale. There was pain in that room. Meghan's scream still rings in my ears. And that poor child." He just looked confused. From these private conversations emerged a fuller picture, one not shaped by palace statements or legal filters, but by raw human observation. One mother who spoke anonymously to a friend said she had felt secondhand shame watching the events unfold. "I looked at Meghan and saw a woman unraveling. A woman trying desperately to keep her reality from bleeding into public view. But you can't hide from the truth when it's standing in front of you, saying your child calls him daddy." Others expressed concern not for Meghan or Harry, but for the children in the room. One father told a journalist under condition of anonymity, "The kids knew something was wrong. My daughter asked me that night, 'Why was the princess crying?' How do I answer that? I'm a parent, not a spin doctor." There was also discussion about how the school handled the situation in the moment. Most parents agreed that the teachers acted with composure under pressure, ushering children to quiet zones, distracting them with games and snacks, shielding them from the escalating tension between adults. But several raised questions about the institutional response afterward. Why were some parents asked to turn over their phones? Why were statements given under the watch of lawyers rather than counselors? Why did the school issue a vague, overly sanitized email about a challenging emotional situation involving guests instead of acknowledging the truth? One PDA mother, a psychologist, voiced her frustration in an internal letter to the board. "We speak constantly about fostering emotional resilience in our children. But how are we modeling that when the adults in the room lie by omission? This wasn't just a moment. It was a public identity collapse. And our children witnessed it. We owe them clarity, not censorship." Still, not all testimonies were sympathetic. A small faction of parents, already skeptical of Meghan and Harry's presence in the community, treated the incident as validation of long-standing suspicions. "She always seemed on edge," one wrote privately. "Too polished. Too controlling. This didn't feel like a breakdown. It felt like a mask finally slipping." Others expressed anger. They brought chaos into a sacred space, said a PDA father whose son had to be picked up early due to emotional distress. This wasn't a red carpet. It was a nursery, a safe place, and they shattered that. But perhaps the most poignant reactions came not in public statements or private group chats, but in one-on-one moments shared between concerned parents. One mother recalled meeting another at the grocery store a few days after the event. Their carts crossed paths, and after a pause, both stopped, looked at each other, and said nothing for a full 5 seconds. Finally, the other mother broke the silence. "I can't stop thinking about it," she whispered. Neither could anyone else. The school held an emergency PDA meeting 3 days later to address the incident. No media were allowed. No recordings permitted. The principal assured families that support services would be made available, that staff had been briefed, that the school would do everything to protect the children. But questions remained. Would Meghan and Harry return? Was Archie still enrolled? Had the school contacted child welfare authorities? Were parents bound by NDAs? Or could they speak if subpoenaed? The room buzzed with tension. No definitive answers were given. Just reassurance, policies, plans, and promises. Outside the building, journalists lingered behind bushes and parked vans. Drones were spotted overhead. The nursery's address was leaked to gossip blogs. What had once been a sanctuary of silence now throbbed with external pressure. And within the PDA, a line had been drawn. Some wanted to forget, to move on, to protect the children and the school's reputation. Others believed it was time to tell the truth, to demand accountability not just from royalty, but from the systems that enable secrecy in places meant for children. But one fact was unanimous. They had seen it, heard it, felt it. They had witnessed a moment where reality pierced illusion, where a carefully protected royal narrative dissolved in a nursery full of toddlers, sippy cups, and primary colors. And the memory wouldn't fade. Not for them. Not for their children. Not for Archie. In what may be the most shocking royal incident since the Sussexes left the monarchy, eyewitnesses say Prince Harry physically grabbed Meghan Markle by the collar moments after her longtime bodyguard publicly declared, "I am Archie's real father." The meltdown didn't happen behind palace walls, but inside a nursery full of toddlers. Meghan fled the scene in tears, screaming about the truth coming out too soon. So what really happened in that room? Why did Meghan spiral? And why are PDA members now speaking out despite royal pressure to stay silent? Stay with us. What you're about to hear will change everything you thought you knew about the royal family.